All right, let's talk receivers, Josh. If we look at this, you got Jackson Smith Enigba minus 200. Then you got Quentin Johnston plus 450. Zay Flowers, what a name, Zay Flowers at plus 600. Jordan Addison, and down the line, who do you think will be the first drafted wide receiver this year?
I really like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think for me personally, he's probably the most surefire wide receiver in the class. At the same time, I would be inclined to take Quentin Johnston as the potential first wide receiver off the board because he has that combination of size, speed, and ability after the catch. So for me, I think he offers the most upside at the position. However, I will say that you really have to consider the teams that could be in the market for the position at that stage of the draft. So you're talking about a
Right.
run on the position possibly happening middle of the first round, maybe even early 20s, somewhere in there. You look at the Titans, the Texans, the Patriots, the Packers, the Seahawks, maybe those teams are in the mix. I do think probably the majority of those teams would be more inclined to take somebody like Smith and Jigba, who's going to work out of the slot, be a complement to bigger wide receivers already on the roster, whether that's Christian Watson, DK Metcalf. But I can't help but think that Johnston with the value here is probably where I would be laying the money.
Yeah. I mean, I think Johnson and Flowers are the two looks here. By the way, Johnson, as Josh points out, you talk about the size. Like, he's the only guy on this list of the top 5 receivers that's over 6 feet tall. Like there's two, I think Hyatt and JSN are both 6 feet even, maybe. Zay Flowers like 5'10". I mean, so in other words, like, there's only one guy who's got the actual size of, a prototypical number one. Like, a lot of these guys, like Josh Downs, who's not even doesn't even make this list. I don't know how far down Downs is, but like, he's like, again, slot style receiver. Not saying all these guys are going to be like that. It's just, size is important to NFL teams. They want, they want the, you want to be able to go up and win one-on-one. What did you make that face? It is. Size matters in the NFL draft, Katie. Size matters.
Yep. Say that again.
God, you really are falling into the host role here. You want, I mean, 6'4" is a huge difference as a wide receiver between 6 feet tall and 6'4". You're talking about, like, if you get a Jalen Ramsey style, or a Sauce Gardner, like, you're getting a one-on-one matchup against a quarterback. Yes, you could beat a quarterback, like that with speed on the inside and cutting it. But, like, can you move? Can you move certain wide? Like Josh Downs, for instance, I don't think teams will look at him and say, "Can you move him outside?" You're going to play him in the slot, and that's a hard projection to make on how a college player is going to project as a number one wide receiver. Remember, your hashes are closer. You have less room to operate. You're going up against elite talent on the outside. Whereas in college, you could draw some dude, every week, just because of how it works out. And to Josh's point, you start looking at where this first receiver is going to come off the board. I mean, it's gonna be the under on receivers in the first round is probably a good look. Like, who's the first team that's going to take a wide receiver? Obviously, maybe, Carolina, Houston,
maybe the Seahawks at number 20.
And Metcalf. We're talking about 20.
Yeah, 20. Yeah, 5. I think they go defense.
I think you can make the case for Green Bay at 15, especially as like an FU to Rodgers after they trade him. I don't think New England at 14. New England at 14 is certainly live for that as well. And they have to know they need speed down the field, and they've been terrible at identifying what wide receivers they want to bring in. I think Houston at 12 is a sneaky one too, where you add a wide receiver to pair with a quarterback that you take at number 2. Presumably they do that. Philly, for the love of God, Howie Roseman, don't do it. Just stop trade for Tennessee. You could make the case at 11 that they need help at wide receiver as well. It would. I think it would make, like, if they added a wide receiver in the draft. I'm not saying that they would automatically be, an elite guy out of the box, but like if you threw like a Zay Flowers in there with Treylon Burks, and you have Derrick Henry, and I don't really have anybody tight end. God, this offense is so bad. But like, if you added another receiver in the first round, Tennessee, you would feel a little more comfortable with what they had on offense. So I think that 10 or that 11 to 15 range is where you would really start seeing a wide receiver come off the board. Seattle at 20 is not a crazy idea at all, especially with Tyler Lockett getting a little bit older and suddenly into commercial or like residential real estate now, which is not
Wait,
something I saw.
what?
Yeah, he was like tweeting about he's like house under contract. I was like, did he buy that house? It's very small for an NFL wide receiver, for like a professional football player. And it's like, no, that's his picture in like a little blazer, like selling the house.
Wow.
Baltimore,
That is
you have
interesting.
to, yeah, Baltimore, you have to think could consider another wide receiver early. They'll throw Lamar a bone. The Giants, there's just not a ton of landing spots. I think Kansas City is always live to take a wide receiver at 31, especially like a Josh Downs or somehow Zay Flowers is there. But to Josh's point, I would be looking at both Quentin Johnson and Zay Flowers as the bets to make here. Like, I think this market is badly skewed. Even if Jackson Smith is the guy and he's the number one, like I think minus 200 is too much. There's way too much. There's a difference in what teams need and what type of receiver these teams might take. And the teams just might love Zay. Zay Flowers is a dude. Like, I think Zay Flowers is a stud. I mean, I watch a lot of him. He's incredible. Quentin Johnson has that speed and that size that teams covet. So I think it should probably be more like even money for Jackson Smith. And then if I were betting this, I would have action on both Quentin Johnson and Zay Flowers, I think, to go first. And if scroll down a little bit, Billy, if Josh Downs is anything over like 20-1, I would consider that too. If he's not on there, don't worry about it.
To your point, too, I think when teams look at the size profile of a Zay Flowers or a Jordan Addison or a Jackson Smith-Njigba, Josh Downs, as you mentioned, they may look at day two and say, hey, we can find a comparable player like a Downs, like a Tyler Scott from Cincinnati, somebody in that regard that, maybe we can take a different position on day one and still get a player that's maybe doesn't have quite the ceiling, but is comparable in skill set on day two.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, look, again, if Josh Downs is your guy, and I just come back to him because he's so slot heavy. Like, he's 90-something% in the slot at Carolina, I think. If not, like, it might be 100%, honestly. And if you draft him, you're going to get him on punt returns and kick returns and all that stuff. That's great. That's a huge addition. And I think he's a dynamic player, and I think he's going to be a very good NFL player. But you are not going to you run the risk of him not being on the field on every single snap. And if you're using a top 15, 20 pick on that, like that's something that NFL teams are definitely going to consider.
I agree.
All right, moving on to the first drafted defensive player. Will Anderson Jr. is the heavy favorite, the juiciest odds we've seen so far, minus 450. Then you got Jalen Carter plus 800. He's actually tied in the odds with Tyree Wilson at plus 800. Then Christian Gonzalez at plus 900. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, for my money, Will Anderson Jr. is probably the safest among this group yet again, but you also have to take into consideration who is making the pick, because we've already heard a lot of buzz that Arizona is possibly trading out of number 3 overall. So you can't just sit here and think, okay, Arizona, number 3 overall, let's say they're going to take the surest thing to kind of rebuild this franchise with first-year head coach Jonathan Gannon. I don't think you can do that. So for me, if that were to happen and then suddenly Seattle is sitting there with the number 5 overall selection and they're picking the first defensive player off the board, I'm more inclined to take the value on a Tyree Wilson or a Jalen Carter, because that's a franchise that is not afraid to think out of the box, but they're also looking for those athletic traits. They've gone for the Bruce Irvins in the past. They've gone for Jordan Brooks, LJ Collier, all those guys. I mean, it's typically at the end of the first round, but they certainly have a type. So I would be more inclined to take the value on either Carter or Wilson, while acknowledging that Anderson is probably the safest option of the group.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect analysis here, is that Will Anderson's probably more than likely the first defensive player off the board, just because he's, doesn't have the stuff, the off-field stuff that Jalen Carter has. I don't think Seattle personally, like, dude, you look at Jalen Carter's, like, have you seen his mock draftable chart? It only has 4 things. It's like hand size, arm length, weight, and height. But it's like a perfect diamond, which is, I mean, again, these things there's all kinds of different, stuff that you can look into. But you just look at like Tyree Wilson's sort of profile from a explosive perspective, and guys like Chandler Jones and Alden Smith pop up as comparables, right? Taco Charlton, not as exciting, of course, but then you go and look at Will Anderson, and Kayvon Thibodeau pops up as one, but there's just some. It feels like maybe of a floor ceiling discussion, right? Like I think Seattle, if Jalen Carter and Will Anderson are both there, with Seattle at 5, and there's a very good there's a really good chance that somebody trades the 3 with the Cardinals, who desperately need talent across the board, have a new GM, have a new head coach, have to figure out what they're that they trade out of that spot. And I think it's been pointed out that Will Anderson maybe not a great fit with that Jonathan Gannon scheme. So you can have a situation where if you take both Jalen Carter and Tyree Wilson at 8-1, that you have it sort of covered if the Cardinals trade out, and then 5 is the first pick, where the Seahawks again could be taking somebody, or if Arizona stays there and takes a defensive player, but it isn't Will Anderson because they don't think he's the right scheme fit. Like they're not going to, if we have to assume the Texans and the Panthers are going to take a quarterback at 1 and 2, right? And if they do that, then the Colts are at 4, and if you want to get either Will Levis or Anthony Richardson and guarantee yourself you get them, you have to trade up to 3. And I think the Cardinals would probably be more likely to trade out at a discounted price. Not saying that they'll do it for free, but that they know what they need in terms of, and you got a Monty Ossenfort type who's coming from, has a New England background, right? Right? Am I crazy? He has a New England background, or is it Tennessee background? Didn't Monty Ossenfort have New England? Whatever the case. Yeah, sure, sounds good. I mean, he was in Tennessee. Yeah, he's got a New England background. Yeah, he was the area. Yeah, he was he was in New England forever. You know what New England GMs like? What New England Belichick proteges like to do? Trade down.
Mm-hmm.
Like it makes a ton of sense that Arizona would trade out of that spot, and that they would let somebody come up and get Levis or Anthony Richardson before the Colts could get him. It makes a ton of sense that they would trade out of that spot with the Colts, move to 4, and then let somebody come up and get the 4th pick for a quarterback, whoever's left, because the Seahawks are at 5 and have been out there flaunting it with every quarterback that they can get a selfie with, including Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. So I think it's a really, really reasonable case that Seattle, as Josh points out, is making that first pick at 5, first non-quarterback pick, and that Jalen Carter and Tyree Wilson could both go above Will Anderson. And then, you have, I guess it's 6, you'd have Detroit sprinting to get Will Anderson. I don't know. Kind of interesting. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I thought there.